Good evening, everybody. This is Dr. Hack. I thought I would give an example today of how we used to study the endgame and why it mattered to do it that way. Because we would always take a position and we would work it backwards into the middle game to where it had meaning. Let's try to do that. So first, I think I grabbed a very cool game, Karpov. If you've never studied Karpov, he's worthwhile. He's a very, very strong positional genius. And I do use that word genius for sure. And so we get to a game, one of his games against Topalov, who became the second world champion in the early 2000s when the world championships were split apart right before they merged back together. So a very strong player on his way to the top, right? He's rising. He's at 2640 at this point. Becomes much stronger. Topalov peaked over 2700. So this is the move that Karpov played, right? And that's kind of cool, right? Well, we kind of notice that there's a pin, and the bishop will be won if we take the knight. And if the bishop does something else, maybe this knight's in trouble. So we've got to be very careful with black. And what he did was he just chose to go ahead and take the knight. Well, that's not strange yet. That seems very normal. So we're going to take our piece back because we should. And now black plays a move to defend the knight because it's in trouble and something needs to happen. And now one of the strangest things I've ever seen in a chess game came up. An exchange sacrifice, giving up a rook for a minor piece. And he did it this way. And this is very weird, right? Now, you might think, why can't he just take the knight? Because that's what I thought, right? He's got a bishop aimed at it and a queen aimed at it. The problem that we face with white is that the queen can only defend the bishop from this square at the moment. And so if this rook just chases the queen off, we'll get the bishop back. So we're not too worried about that. From black's point of view, we see that because he's a very good player. But he probably didn't necessarily appreciate this move. And there's one pawn that he just won. And now here comes two pawns that he just won. Right? And now he gets the minor piece. So he got a knight and two pawns for that rook. Now it didn't happen exactly like this. I'm going to show you. The exact set of moves were rook to a7 first. And then he won the g pawn as well. Right? And he decided maybe he should take that rook after all. And the position went exactly the same as the other one, except the rook was here instead of on a8. Okay. And so when we get a position like this that we just don't understand, and we go, I have no idea what's going on here, which I don't, right? At the time that I was studying this, I couldn't figure this out. Doesn't look like white's winning the game. He just gave up material, right, for some reason. And I had to go to the end game to kind of figure out what this was. Okay? Because watch how this game ends. I'm just going to flash the final position for you. White has a bishop against a rook and several pawns. Well, let's check something on an empty board. What if you just have a rook and you're trying to face a bishop? And you can see that I've got the table base open. I'll close it for a minute here. I suggest, or I encourage you, to go and mess around with this and try to make a checkmate with white. Play against the computer. Play against a friend. When you turn on the table base, what this is telling us is that every single move that white can play, the best play for black ends in a tie. There's no way for him to win. And that's weird, right? That means that this rook and this bishop are equal. And I suppose when I was studying this, what I did next was I moved the pieces around the board and looked at the table base to see when it would change. And I saw when I moved the pieces over a little bit, white started winning. And I thought, scratch head, right? Why is that? And what I found was that if the king can ever get in this corner, the bishop blocks from both directions, and that's what makes the draw. When the king can't reach this corner, then possibly we find ways to win the game for white. And so if we were to do something like this, that would keep the king from reaching that corner, and maybe then we could win the game. And I said, well, that's great and all, but what if these pieces aren't on the back row? What if they're on the side or in the middle of the board? And then it all goes back to draw again. And we go, huh. Well, we can't win the game if they're in the middle either. We can't win the game if they're in this corner. But we can win the game maybe if they're on the back row, but not in this corner. Okay, right? And that got me to start thinking, because this means that most of the time on an empty board with no pawns, a rook and a bishop are equal pieces, except in very rare cases where the king is trapped on the wall. And then you can start the wheels turning, and you can say, well, if that's true, which it is, what would happen if the bishop had a pawn? Because technically, if the pawn wasn't there, these two could make the draw, because they're in the middle of the board. Huh, right? That means that if I say it this way, this is an equal ending where black has the winning advantage. He has a chance to win the game where white does not. So if you're playing white, maybe your first idea would be to do this. And black makes a move and you take the pawn and that's a draw. Well, shoot, that's not very interesting then, right? It's too easy to make the draw for white. Black has a chance to win the game if he makes a queen, but white's always going to take that pawn off the board. And then we start to look at the next thing, which is what if we add another pawn to it? And all of a sudden, black starts to win the game regularly with most moves. Oh boy, right? So what we see is equal material. A bishop and 2 pawns equals 5. A rook equals 5. But because of this weird thing with the king and the bishop versus the king and the rook that was equal, the game is equal, but black has all the winning chances. And we go back and we look at this position here with Topolov. Now we understand. The game is not equal. White is ahead by 3 pawns, and white has all the winning chances. Even if white were to lose all of his pawns, there's no way he's going to lose the game. That is absolutely incredible, right? I hope it is to you too. Now, I was reminded, the reason why this came up is because I was reminded of a game I played in the U.S. Amateur Championships. And I can't remember why I was in this tournament. I think somebody invited me from Grand Rapids, and I decided to go ahead and jump in with them. And I played board 2, and I played against some very, very good opponents. I think they were all rated, in the 2000s, roughly. This one was no exception. I just don't remember who it was because I didn't write it down. Oops. And the game was a very complicated English game. And I'm just going to move forward into the middle, because there was a moment here where I could, if I wanted to, sacrifice an exchange. And it happens here. And I chose to go ahead and do so. And what I noticed was I will always win at least one more pawn. So now I'll have 6 pawns and he will have 5. Right? And so I started to work on that problem. I will always win at least one more pawn. Okay? Now if I was really paying attention, I would take the pawn now. Right? And just kind of go with it from there. What I was worried about was all the queen checks coming in from this diagonal and what that might mean for my king, right? Especially with maybe sacrificing here. So I was calculating a lot of moves and a lot of things. And what I decided to do in the end was just to go ahead and develop my queen and start to make threats on his king. I'm still going to win this pawn. It's not going to change. And he played queen to d1. Now if this knight were to move, this check would happen. And it's the same problem that I had a minute ago. And so I said, okay, well maybe I can block that check for a minute here, not moving my knight yet, because that keeps the queen out. And maybe I can do it in a minute, right? And he starts to play pawns forward. Okay, no problem. And then he defends his pawn. So I haven't won any material yet. I need to get the exchange, and then I need to get 2 pawns. And that's what I'm working towards here. And I'm trying to find ways to do that. Okay. So now we're thinking about taking the pawn at g4 and then making some kind of a weakness and an attack there. And he decided not to let me. It's very smart. Okay, and then I played a move that to most eyes will not make any sense, which is fine. I spent, maybe 30 minutes on this move. This was a very, very long game. And what I decided was that if he were to move his rook, then I could take this pawn, and then I would also get this pawn in the end. And that's what I was calculating out. I could always block the bishop. I could always attack this again if I needed to. And I would always win it. And so I was trying to decoy his rook, but at the same time, what I was also trying to do was I was also trying to keep his rook off of G3, because that would cause me troubles down this file if I were to take the G pawn. Okay, right? He said Queen H1. And I decided to start going after the F pawn again. Okay, now I get the F pawn. Great. If you're a very, very strong player and you're watching this game, you might see that there were sometimes better moves that could be played, or your preference would be different than what was played in the game. That's okay. I think the computer only picked one or two moves different than what we played, because this was kind of a line that was not forced, but it was necessary most of the time to play the moves that we're playing. And again, there were better ideas sometimes. Okay. And so we get into this situation where his king is starting to get on the run, and it was almost trapped. It was almost to the point where I could just go and win the game. Almost, right? And he plays now rook takes h4. Now, if I had understood the position correctly, this move completely wins. Oops, completely crushing. And the game would end in a few moves after that. I didn't see that. All I was thinking to myself was, I sacrificed in exchange. I must get my pawns for it, or else. And so I went ahead and took the d3 pawn. Okay, and now the queen can move. And we're setting up threats now. We're setting up threats against this king, against checkmate. There's a checkmate threat here, if these two knights were to move. And I am showing this complicated, convoluted middle game to prove one thing, and one thing only. And that is, on the exchange sacrificing, on a positional exchange sacrifice, it can take many moves to realize what your advantage is. Many, many moves. And now I'm going to take this game and fast forward it to the last position where we agreed to a draw. And you'll notice that I have all the winning chances. And maybe even one extra pawn. And now we know what that means. And that makes this game actually incredible. I really hope you enjoyed this. And if you want to know why I agreed to a draw here, because I knew I was winning probably. I agreed to a draw because it was lunchtime. and my team had already lost a round. Their team had crushed every other board. I was the last game playing, and a 1 point wouldn't change the outcome of the match. And so a half point was a-okay. I think I've talked enough. You guys have a good evening. Take care now.